So this video, I didn't intend to make, but I'm going to have to make it because I wanted to make the networking system for my game, Castle Wars. However, in order to test the networking system, I need the combat system to work so that, you can play the game. And in order to now test the combat system without the networking system, I need an enemy. And I figure I have, about 2 days. It is January 30th, and I want to finish this in 2 days. I want an enemy that will follow me around and attack me and then die and respawn and do the same thing. That way I can test the combat system, the procedural animation for the first-person sword, and just make sure that everything works fine. And then I can finish the combat, and then I can do the networking. So that's the goal. If I change my outfit, or if my hair gets cleaner or dirtier, it is because I am not filming this all at one time. So sorry. In the last mainline devlog, I added enemies which had a health system and I think a name tag. They were static, so they didn't move or they didn't fight back, but that's kind of hard to test like an active combat system in, so I need to update them. The combat system is in the process of being updated and it will get its own video. I'm not going to talk about that much now, so I guess get subscribed and you'll hear about that later. Yeah, my goal is to get most or all of this done in 24 hours, so I guess follow me through it.
Like a DJ, like a dancer, your arms and legs covered in little white hairs, like a carpet, no, like a moss sweater. That's sweet, baby. You smiled and said to me as if I couldn't have said it any better. You got it, flaunt it, everything is good.
I just created this script, which you can't read, obviously, but I'll put it on the screen, and it's pretty simple. So there's a trigger in the game world, which is pretty faint, but it is there, and basically anytime the player enters or exits this, it gets added or removed from a list of players in the zone. Okay, so now if we go to the training ground, and then I go and we select the enemy trigger, you can see on the right that the player is not in the trigger. It is, and now it's not again. So the idea is that when you go into the trigger, you're now close enough for the enemies to see you, and then they'll start to navigate towards you. And ideally avoid any sort of obstacles, but I'm not exactly sure how I want to handle navigation yet. And then you go and you'd attack. There's that. So now the goal is to make them move towards the player.
I can be a stripper if you want me to.
Tapped him behind, he looked at me with the same milky eyes that seemed to be spilling off the floor.
I thought I was going to make it so they can move. That's actually the next step. I made it such that we now have a list of enemies here. And with this list of enemies, every time the fixed update is called, we give them a target if there is something in their area of attack. And so now when we play, the enemies know who they should be attacking. You see that we now have 3 enemies, which are these 3. And then when I go in here, you see that I am now in the trigger. And if we look at dummy 1, we have them as a target. Dummy 2, same thing, and dummy 3. There should be a more complex way of determining a target, but right now I'm testing this in single player, so this can be fixed or made more complex later. I need to show this, so I just wrote a really quick movement code that doesn't, it ignores obstacles, and it does this. So I'm not in the thing yet, but as soon as I walk into the thing, they go up. And what's happening is like, you see, I was conscious enough that we just keep the Y position that was original, but then when I normalize it, we lose that. Okay. What I can do, though, is set this to 0, and then that should fix it. So now if I step in there, they come towards me, and they will push me, which is interesting. But they do go into each other, which is a problem.
It's been a while since I played for you.
Okay, so I forgot that I'm a student, and so at this point in the video, I had to go to class. The good thing is, I absolutely suck at being a student, So I worked on this all through class. I don't have footage of me talking about it. I just have clips of progress. So I'm going to just quickly try and speed fire through all this. The movement was using Unity's transform system, which doesn't necessarily align with the collider system, and so objects could phase through each other. So I wanted to move that onto the physics system, and we got this beauty of a dog pile. I was like, okay, that's not great. And I constrain the rotation to just the y-axis, but you'll notice that when they get to their destination, they just start spinning. You got to disable the angular velocity so they don't spin whenever they hit something. You'll also notice that when they were spinning, their name tags didn't update properly, and that's because they were using a local rotation vector instead of a global rotation vector, and so I changed that to a global one. And here's them being fixed. Then I added eyes to the enemies. You can see that the eyes, they don't rotate because we disabled all of that angular velocity, but because we disabled the angular velocity, we can just set the rotation of the object manually each frame using the same sort of look at code from the name tag to just look in the direction that we are moving. And yeah, that's all I got while I was in class.
Never thought I'd be a game girl.
Okay, so I just gave them all a sword, and I think it looks funny. So let's see how that looks. I just think that they look better with something other than just being, a little red dot. Also, when they come back in, the swords don't load fully. So their hands are just open. Okay. Well, I think for the rest of the night, I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to try and make it so that the existing sword stats and animations can be used by the enemies. That way, you can kind of have a little bit of a fight. I don't know how exactly I'm going to be able to do blocking because I don't really know how to make AI, and I don't really feel like doing that right now. It's pretty much just going to be enemies walk up and then they choose an attack. Probably at random, honestly. I'll just make it 1, 2, or 3 because there's only really 3 options. Realistically, I just need this so I can fully polish how it feels to block and to attack. And that's about it. Yeah, I'm probably not going to time-lapse it because it's going to be really boring to just watch me debug code for 2 hours. I said I was going to work on this for a few hours last night, and that did not happen. I just played Breath of the Wild in bed. So this morning, I took a stab at it, and I've now fixed the animation. Now when we load in, you see they have the sword animator working, getting it to that idle pose the first time, and when they respawn, it'll go back and they unsheath the swords again. So we're good. They don't just hold their arms out like this anymore. The other thing that we have now is if we look at these dummies and then we go all the way to their swords, you can see that they now have this distance value, which if there's no target is just 100, but if I'm within the zone, is an actual distance. And so what that'll do is it'll give me a little bit of, options, like what attack should the enemy do based on how far they are away and that sort of stuff. I made a very simple attack system. So basically there's a timer, which by default is half a second. And every time that this timer hits 0, we generate a random number. And then depending on what that random number is, we're either going to do the primary if we're in range, the secondary if we're in range, or the melee attack. Melee. It's a melee weapon, so it's punching instead of using the weapon. And if you're not in that range, it just doesn't do an attack. And we wait. Let's see what that looks like. I've already tested it. I know it works. They now come to you, and when they're within range, they start attacking. And sometimes they all sync up. There's very proto combat going on. So they don't do damage yet because the way that the combat works here is we start an attack and we also start data collecting. And here, if we go to the definition, it's a coroutine that basically just starts a collection variable, and while that collection variable is on, we track everything that the sword goes through, and then we apply damage to it the first time it goes through the sword. I made it so the enemies attack and they do damage. I had to write a little bit of a workaround because the attack trigger on the sword, which is what I was stealing to put on the enemy, only really worked if you were attacking enemies. I just had to put a little workaround in the code so that if it's an enemy, it only attacks players. And that's probably going to be something that needs to be changed later. But now when we go in here, you see that they start walking towards me, and when they attack, you die. A possible issue is that they will now follow you all across the map. The good thing is they can't jump, so they can probably still attack because the swords are going to go through the geometry. So there's definitely still some bugs. to work out. One being, I don't know why I can't use the sword here. That's very interesting. To use sword. It's interesting that their health bar is gray. Okay, so really quickly, I fixed a few bugs. So the name tags now show the proper amount of health without even needing to walk into the area. So as you can see, before I'm even there, they all have their health. I lowered the amount of damage that the enemies do by half, so that way you don't die as quickly. I might need to make the damage that the sword does some sort of function of its velocity as well as its just inherent damage value. I also made it so that if you die from being killed by an enemy and you respawn, you can still use your sword. So of course there's still issues with the combat because that's sort of in progress. The whole point of this is that I'm adding in blocking, which is very much like the blocking in Destiny 2. It is going to essentially be something that either significantly lessens or prevents you from getting hit. You just obviously can't attack while you're blocking. I think I got blocking to work. Basically what's happening is we take a look vector of where the player is looking, as well as a vector from where the camera is to the direction that the enemy is. We have two vectors, and we want to determine the angle between those two vectors, and if that angle is less than 60 degrees either way, then the damage is blocked. So you can see there, we have not blocked any damage, but if we are blocking, we are taking no damage. I should probably make it so that there's some sort of indication that, you know, the attack has been blocked, probably some sort of sound or jolt animation, but it's working. That'll probably be in the next video because the next video is on making the combat feel good, not about making the enemies. Yeah. Hopefully you liked this style of content. If you did, please let me know. It's not what I usually produce. This style of devlog is a lot easier to make. It's a lot more on the fly. So yeah, like this video if you liked it, dislike it. If you didn't like it, do please let me know what you think of the style of the video. The normal devlogs aren't going to be going away, but this is a lot easier to make. So if it is something that you like, I can make more of them. Yeah. They'll probably be on smaller topics like this, rather than on, you know, the combat system or the networking system or the UI system. Like the video, dislike it, comment, subscribe if you want to see, you know, the video on combat or the video on getting networking to work. So yeah, see you soon.